I actually would like to begin the panel discussion with your take, basically on the title, Investing in Sovereignty, a New Single Market for a New World Order. What is the New World Order going to look like, and how sovereign can Europe actually really be if we look at this realistically? Oh, you okay? Oh, no, women first. let's do women first.
I thought you.
I'm happy if you're so talkative.
So it is mic on. Can you hear me well? Yes. Yeah. So I'm sorry. I thought you were looking at me. So first of all, let me thank you for having me on this panel. I would also like to make one remark before I answer your question, which is I was actually delighted to see that today at this event we talked so much about Europe, because I've had other events where everything is focusing only on German issues, and I think that is absolutely necessary that we think in terms of European solutions, and that is actually also related to your question. I mean, of course, the world has changed quite a bit. It has become less open, less safe. It's starting to question things like multilateralism, free trade. This is a world that is very different from what we had some years ago. And I would like to make the point that one of the ways to deal with that is to exploit the potential that Europe has. And this is most of all the single market, which has been one of the sources of prosperity for Europe and especially for Germany. But we also know that there's still a lot of potential there that could be reaped, and that would be my answer to your question.
How sovereign do you think Europe can be in the end?
How sovereign? Mm-hmm. Well, so what is clear is that Europe is connected to the rest of the world. It will always be connected to the rest of the world, and we know about the particular dependence on China. But of course, we have a lot of international trade, and we will never be able to be only inward-looking. But in order to retain some sovereignty, we need to be taken seriously, and that requires a certain, let's say, size and importance, and that means we must speak with the European voice. So even Germany, which is the biggest country in Europe, is not large enough. So we need to speak with a European voice, and then we can retain some sovereignty.
The New World Order, what's your take on it? What will it look like?
Well, I think, first of all, we can be very much sovereign. I mean, we are 450 million in the European Union, and if we finally get in various industries, by the way, far beyond the banking industry, to one single market, to one real single market, then, to be honest, we are just from the consumers, from the size of the market, from the innovation capability, from the engineering we have in this region, we can be stronger than the US, and we should never forget that. And therefore, you know, I think it's really important also what we heard from our predecessor, that we talk about the opportunities, that we talk about the potential. There are still a lot of investors actually who want to invest into the European Union, but it's hard for them to invest because we have 27 different markets. And of course, if you then have the choice between the US with one market, so to say one framework, and you have 27 on the other end, well, guess what, where the money is flowing. And therefore, I do believe that actually if we finally can overturn it and really see the European Union as one market across the industries, then there is huge potential. And that does not mean, by the way, that we need to not benefit from global trade agreements, from globalization. Globalization will look different. But most important is that in the next step, we are enhancing our home market. And home market cannot be Germany on its own, as you said. It must be Europe. And then we can be actually quite strong. If you do this, then you know what? It's only the next meter that we finally get that one, what we all need, and that's the Capital Markets Union, because we need to finance all these investments, and that we can only do with one Capital Markets Union. So I think if we are brave enough, if we take the right decisions, Europe can actually, even in this difficult world, can actually rise, because underlying a lot of investors like actually to invest into European companies.
Now, you were saying they like to invest in Europe, and while you were saying this, I was wondering, they like Europe, do they still like Germany? Because I've been told by some that they have to start giving explanations to shareholders why they invest in Europe or in European plants or in German plants, actually, rather German than European. Is that something you've heard, you've been confronted with?
There is certainly so to say a second thought about Germany for the time being, but you know, on a macro level, they are looking at Germany slightly different than before. There is no doubt, and we need structural changes. And I'm sure, and we heard it from all the speeches before, that actually there is a lot of agreement on structural changes, but somehow it's hard to implement. Now, what they really like is actually on the micro. If you look into the individual companies, if you look into the innovations, I mean, we have CEOs here being very successful with their products. So they like Germany in particular from a micro point of view. What we need to change are macro structural changes. If we do this, we shouldn't underestimate that investors, at the end of the day, their main goal is to diversify their investments. And diversification means that they don't want to put everything into the US or into Asia Pacific. They need a viable European play. And with regard to Germany, they actually like, despite what we just heard, and I take Mr. Hasauff's concerns really seriously, investors are actually looking also at the political landscape. Because one thing is clear, next to diversification, at the end of the day, investors give their money there where there is a stable, legal and democratic framework. We all cannot afford to lose that. If we lose that, then we are actually losing investments from the outside.
Maybe we can talk about this and the implications of the European elections a bit further on during this panel. Now, he just referenced to your company, which is a hydrogen startup. If I understood correctly, your company manufactures machines for hydrogen production. Would you found a company again in Germany?
Big yes, with an exclamation mark behind it. And I think our company is actually a good example of international investors being willing to invest in German companies. We have successfully raised around 1 billion euro. About half of it is equity. There's a bunch of debt instruments from the European Investment Bank, for example, some governmental grants and bank guarantee facilities. The single biggest investor we have is GIC, a Singaporean state fund that invested roughly 1/10 of the money. Another investor is Amazon from the US. So I think Sunfire is a proof that international investors like to invest in innovative companies in Europe, and those investments are relatively recent, so I would say they still do it. This is not 14 years ago when we were founded, but actually a lot earlier. The second, or one of the reasons when I discuss with them why they like to invest in German companies is because I think sometimes different from how we see ourselves internationally, we're still seen as a place on this planet with exceptional mechanical engineering and plant engineering capabilities. And if I would describe the biggest USP that we have is we're actually located in Eastern Germany, which is still one of the places in Germany with the best engineers. We are in a state that receives significant attention and political support. And so to cut it short, I think I would have done this, or I would do this again in Germany, and maybe especially in Eastern Germany, because there's still a lot of attention to what we do there.
That's really interesting with reference to the talk Ina just had. May I ask you how much of your capital actually comes from Germany and Europe, and how much from other continents?
That's difficult from the top of my head, but I would say probably something like 35% is probably non-European. The rest comes from Europe, and a lot of it comes from the UK and from France. Less from Germany, to be honest.
I'm just asking because this morning I think it was the Chancellor that raised the issue that it's not easy enough for founders, startup founders, to have access to capital. What is your take right now on how sovereign Europe can be? And then maybe in the second round, I'll ask you about the perception of other foreigners, of Germany especially, and Europe.
Thank you, Isabel. First of all, I mean, thank you, all of you, staying so late following the fire exercise and everything. You've listened a lot to politicians this day, and I honestly hope that they listen as much to you as industrialists and entrepreneurs, because I think that is the key message for me. Sovereign or not, for me, it's all about the competitiveness, because that's what it boils down to. Europe is falling behind. We might say that there are great companies to invest in, but there are too few. If we look at the statistics, in the last 3 years, foreign direct investments are down by 2/3 in Europe. And then you're going to say, well, it's the pandemic and what have you not. At the same time in the US, they're up by 2/3. So something grim is happening. When we ask the membership of Business Europe, which represents some 20 million companies across Europe, 9 out of 10 say that Europe is now less investable than it was 3 years ago. That is a grim number.
That's a wake-up call. Huh?
And also, if you look at the GDP growth in the last 2 decades, I mean, this is not about business cycle. It's not about the pandemic. It's not about the Russian war in Ukraine. It's structural. In the last 2 decades, the US has grown GDP by 60%, Europe by 30%, which in my view, sovereign, green, digital or not, all that will be academical if we cannot get growth back to Europe. And growth back to Europe, growth back to Europe is about the industrial backbone of Europe. An industrial backbone that runs through Finland, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Czech Republic, down to northern Italy. If we don't get that backbone delivering, we will not succeed and we will be fall behind, and there will be no money for the politicians to spend. And that's why I say, I hope they listen to you as much as you listen to them. And as Siegfried said, you're such a strong voice, BDI, in Brussels. You really bang the drum, you bang it early in the best interest of industry. And it's all about the speed, because today will be the slowest day for industry looking forward. Thank you.
I'd like to dive a little bit deeper with you into this issue. We've talked a lot about Europe, the hopes for Europe today, the single market, the necessities for reforms and change. But one issue has not been raised today, and that is the possibility for the EU to actually act. Do you have any hope that that will change and that the EU will be able to find a quicker pace, quicker decisions?
I think there's been a big change in the last 24 months. How weird it can sound, but I think the US IRA was a wake-up call that made the Commission realize that they had to move faster. Because they were all stuck in regulating anything around green, and then suddenly they see someone on the other side of the Atlantic are really pushing for competitiveness, ease of doing business, and through that creating a lot of growth, jobs, and technological advantages. And they've moved. Have they moved fast enough? But for sure, they have started moving. So I'm positive by heart, and there's no alternative. Honestly, look at Britain. So EU is the solution. We just need to do it a bit better and faster.
Yeah, I'm asking you because there's been a lot of discussion about the decision-making processes within the EU, which take quite a while, right?
I think they can if they want to. You have to kick them quite a lot. Thanks for that, BDI. And we need to be more to do it. And I think we need a strong voice of industry so they realize that we're doing this for the best interest of Germany, the best interest of Europe, and the best interest of competitiveness.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on something that Fredrik just said, also about the speed. I mean, let's not forget, actually the reaction to the pandemic was pretty strong and pretty quick. And let's not forget, there we established a new program. Some of you may see it critically, but it was a big program, Next Generation EU, which is there in order to foster investment in Europe. So, I mean, we all talk about the IRA, but the Next Generation EU is not all that different. And that was really, that came about in record speed, I would say. Let's see whether it's as successful as we all hope. Because that is, of course, crucial also in order to convince people that maybe a similar thing could eventually be reconsidered. But that was actually a big step that was taken very quickly. And on the productivity and competitiveness question, I think you said it very rightly that this didn't start after the pandemic. It started basically 30 years ago. If you look at the numbers and you compare the productivity growth in the US and in Europe, you see that in the middle of the 90s already the divergence started. Before that, Europe was actually catching up, and Europe was at the productivity frontier in the middle of the 90s. But that then changed, and so part of it, if you also consider the evolution over time, seems to be related to a reduction in competition and a reduction in business dynamism. So we have too little entry of new firms, but also too little exit of firms. People are always, I mean, when you hear numbers of bankruptcies going up, people are always very, very concerned. But of course, part of that is needed in the sense of Schumpeter's creative destruction. Some of these bankruptcies are actually needed.
Thank you. Okay. She just mentioned the IRA. I think you founded your company before the IRA. Would not even the IRA have lured you into the US to found your company there?
The company was founded substantially earlier. It was founded actually in 2010. I'm going to break away a bit from the role that I normally take, which of course is also to ask for things and complain a bit. But before the IRA came, there was actually a speech from Ursula von der Leyen talking about the man on the moon moments we need in Europe. And one of the man on the moon moments, she said, was green hydrogen. We need to support green hydrogen. We need to invest into it, and so on. So Europe actually has spent something like 4 billion euros in spending into the green hydrogen industry, and has managed within, I don't know, 3-4 years to actually be in the position that we still have one of the strongest green hydrogen industries in the world. So I think it's not all bad, and there's a couple of good examples. You've just mentioned couple of good examples where we in Europe are actually able to successfully drive forward things and do that at substantial scale. So what has been achieved in my industry, in the green hydrogen industry, was incredible. It was unimaginable in 2019, and look where we are in 2024. Are we going to be successful? Obviously, no one is able to tell that, but what I can tell you is what we need optimism, we need self-confidence, and we need passion, and we need to continue. And next to passion, we also need patience, because those things are not easy. And I'm starting to hear the voice of people saying, yeah, but is it actually going to happen? And it's too expensive and so on. I think we need to continue moving, continue investing. We need to be brave. We need to look at the strength we have in this country and tell positive stories. Of course, there's a lot of things that are not working well, but we've talked a lot about what has to be done to improve those today, and I think from the narrative, that's what we need to focus on.
So from what you've just said, may I assume that you believe Ursula von der Leyen deserves a second term at the top of the EU Commission?
Maybe she does. What is important is that we speak too much about all the things that are negative around us, and I think we should not forget the things that are well and try and repeat those things. And I think she did a good job in 2020 with her speech, and then with a lot of things that were part of the Green Deal. And now we need to continue that with probably an industrial deal, making sure that we're not only doing a positive thing for the climate, but also doing a positive thing for our industry, which I think is a very important second element.
We were actually, and then I know you want to comment on it, but we were actually talking about this morning the fact or the question whether other countries will be willing to send their hydrogen to Germany, or whether they would like to participate in value creation more in their own countries.
I think it should be both, right? It's clear that in Europe we will not produce the entire energy that we need. That's clear, so we will have to import. What is important to us as a company is that we're not just importing the energy, but that we're also thinking about participating in the industry of producing the machines. I think we have the skills for that in that country. It's worth investing in the topic and making sure that we not only buy energy from outside, but actually make sure that we also benefit from a job perspective, from a value creation perspective.
No, I just wanted to a little bit clean up with the myth of the IRA. There is a lot of money involved, that is not the question. But if you ask the CEOs of large companies who are actually participating in the IRA, it's not first and foremost because of the money. It is because of the speed and the simplification in the US to invest. Guess what? If I'm going into the supervisory board of my company and I'm proposing an investment in the US or in Europe, and I can do it in the US in a way that I'm positive cash flow after 2.5 years, and in Europe it takes me 5 or 6 years, guess what, where I'm going? Yeah. So the real issue in the US, it's a very business-minded, very business-oriented, and with less bureaucracy-driven approach. That's what we need. That's number one. Number two, I think we have to learn also again, in particular in Europe, and in particular in this country, to change our attitude to work. I really do believe that in this regard, we are a little bit dishonest to ourselves. And it starts with us in the companies that we need to think about that, you know, if you are in a position that you are not growing and in a certain region, that actually you need to change, you need to restructure, and it also means that you work simply harder. It's the same in business line like it is in sports. If you are not competitive, you have to work harder, and that's what we need to do. And that brings me to the third point, and that is a joint task, in my view, of the politicians, but also of us corporate leaders, and that is honesty. I think the society also in Germany and Europe can actually digest honesty and true statements. But we are not talking about the real challenges. Nobody is talking about that we actually need to change the way we are saving our money or we are paying into our pension plans if we really want to have safe pensions in 15 or 20 years. And in order to have that, we need to have a growth rate of 2.5%. And therefore, let's talk about this. I think people in the street, the society, actually, they deserve the truth. If they get this, I think we can also change the way we're working here.
But how will the truth play out in elections, in federal elections?
No, I think it's always, I know it's difficult, but I think if you combine it with solutions and if you say how you want to make yourself, so to say, growing again, then I do believe you also have a chance to tell people that potentially for the next 3 or 4 years, you also need to save money in certain buckets, and that we are not only can answer all the or can only go via debt increases with regard to certain responses. I really do believe that we need to have a fair discussion, and obviously truth also always means that you need solutions, and these solutions should be explained. And I'm still of the opinion what you can do in a private company overall you can also do with a broader society.
Can I just ask you if you agree with him on the aspect of brutal honesty? I read this morning in the Financial Times, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly, that in France, we're looking forward to the snap elections, and I wonder what that's going to bring for European integration and working together in Europe with regards to single market, that French trust Marine Le Pen's party most when it comes to the economy. So what's happening here?
I think people are smarter at times than the politicians think. I think people are noticing this change across Europe, and they're feeling an uncertainty towards is there growth? Will there be a future for my kids? Will there be a job to go to? And when they also see a lot of initiative, which is basically leveraging coming generations due to the lack of economic growth. I think people are already sort of polling this, so it's already happening. And again, I think the solution to this will be honestly to get the growth back, and people will feel more confident again. You cannot sort of blame people to vote another way.
Yeah, what you were just mentioning reminds me of what went on in the US before Trump was elected first time as president. So do you feel that Europe has the speed and the capacity to develop a strong single market before we head down that same direction, or is it too late?
Honestly, look at the people in this room. Of course we do. it is, the single market is a great thing. It's 450 million consumers. We need to unleash the power of the single market. I think there is a study out showing that we could unleash some 700 billion in value by taking away the hindrance we have in it already. I mean, that's equal to the recovery fund. So, of course, we have a huge possibility, but companies need the right circumstances to get there. And that is affordable energy, it's, to your point, less bureaucracy, and faster permitting times. I think that will unleash the power of European industry.
But give you one example where actually you can see that Europe is making progress without going through an election. I mean, this coalition is the first one in Germany who actually says we need to go for a capital markets union. If you think the progress on securitizations, which we did over the last 12 months, it's actually notable. The way the regulator works with the Private Bank Association plus Brussels on securitization is very, very promising. So we can do it. If we really focus on the 4 or 5 items which we need to pull through, Europe can do it without any elections with outcomes which potentially we all don't want.
Yeah, the Chancellor was talking about access to finance and how important it was this morning, actually. I would like to let him speak because he's been waiting patiently for quite a while now.
I don't want to repeat too much what has been said before. I just wanted to tell a small anecdote. We have an all-hands meeting with the 700 people in my company every month, and out of those 700, I think 500 are located in Eastern Germany, and I think 200 are blue-collar workers. And my comms team knows that. They, at some point in time, came to me and said, "You're always sounding too positive. It's almost too hard to believe this." And don't worry, we can actually take the truth. Yeah? And we've, in our own company, actually turned more towards painting the picture where we want to get, but be substantially more transparent and open about the things that don't work. And I can tell you this has very much changed the spirit in our company, because people feel part of, or this is changing the culture in the company because people feel part of what is happening. So I think, and I had this thought that you mentioned this morning when I heard the speeches of some of the politicians, we could be a bit more open about the hard truth that we're facing in order to stay or to have a prosperous future here in Europe. And just one final sentence, really not to repeat what has been said before, we don't have an alternative to a single European market. That's another brutal truth. If we lose that, there's I think, no chance for anyone here in Europe.
I'd like to ask you about the political landscape a little bit later on, but you've been waiting patiently as well. And then I have another question for you, actually.
So the question was whether Europe can still deliver. And I mean, of course, we've seen in the election that there was a polarization, but fortunately, the center still holds. And so I'm also optimistic that we will be able to deliver on the projects. You mentioned the Green Deal, you mentioned the Capital Markets Union, and so there I'm also optimistic. I mean, on the single market, I think what we have to acknowledge is that, I mean, when it comes to things like harmonization, it's often something that is very tedious. And you know, it's not where you kind of get a lot of enthusiasm from your voters, and this is what I think makes it so hard. The other thing is that, and if we think about Capital Markets Union, for example, that often the member states of the European Union, they seem to think that they are competing against each other, but they're really competing together against. With the rest of the world. And I think this is actually very important. I mean, at European level, there's so many debates on, you know, who gets what and so how some cake is split. But it's really about increasing the European cake. And that is what we should focus on, and not on intra-Europe discussions, which I think often don't lead anywhere.
I'd like to ask you, when it comes to the competitiveness of European companies, often the ECB is mentioned and the question is raised, what can the ECB do to raise competitiveness, to boost competitiveness and boost productivity? But I think you have to put this into perspective with the mandate the ECB actually has. So where do you see the options? Where do you see the limitations?
Well, so it's certainly not the standard task of a central bank to foster competitiveness and productivity. So we have a clear mandate. Our mandate is price stability. And the best contribution that we can have for a healthy business environment is that we provide macroeconomic stability. So that is kind of the key part. Of course, there are other things we do. I mean, if we think about European supervision, for example, I mean, there, of course, when we create a level playing field among the institutions, that also has an effect on, competition, competitiveness, and so on. Hopefully, a good one. You're smiling. Or
he knows I'm passing him the next question.
Think about payments. I mean, of course, there is this whole debate about, the international role of the euro, which is very important for competitiveness. There is the innovation in payments, also related to the digital euro. So there are also issues where we contribute to competitiveness and productivity, but our primary mandate clearly is price stability. Mm.
So I assume you know that you're getting the next question. Because we had a few rounds together already at the TDE here in the past few years. She mentioned the word level playing field. And if we think about a level playing field in European competitiveness, we have to put this into perspective with other systems and other economic systems and other mandates of other central banks. So is the ECB's mandate still fit for this time?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. We did 85% everything correct since 2008, in particular in the banking industry, to better regulate the banks. We were not well regulated, and I think the ECB did overall a good job in making sure that now we have a solid, a robust, and a profitable banking system. So it would be completely wrong to not talk about that. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes the last 15%, though, are exactly the competitive edge which we don't have. And therefore, I very much support that, what Isabel said. We need a level playing field, in particular with the US. Yeah. And if we look at capital requirements, at other requirements, I would say that there is room for improvement and that we should review that. Look what is just happening in the UK, by the way. Yeah. A broad review of regulatory standards in the UK without losing robustness and stability of the banks. But we need to look at this. And if we have the joint agreement that this is something where also the European regulator and Brussels is willing to do that, and that's my understanding, that we are on the right way. So, it's always the same in life. If you had a crisis like 2008, obviously you do the necessary things, but then sometimes the balance is not that right anymore. And therefore, the word competitiveness, and that we need to have that whenever we think about regulation, is, I think, something where in Europe we can do better, but I'm hopeful that we get there.
But just let me ask you again, because I really want to make sure I get this right. Are you implying that you see room for flexibility with regards to the mandate of the ECB? In these
Not with regard to the mandate of the ECB. I think we have to be very careful, and the ECB has a very clear mandate. Now we need to think about as a monetary side, as a regulatory side. Overall, when it comes to regulation in Europe, I do believe that with regard to level playing field and being competitive with others, I think there is something where we need to work on, yes.
Would you like to comment on the flexibility of a mandate?
So that's a point I probably don't fully agree. I mean, I agree with you that we've done many good things after the global financial crisis. And I mean, I think we shouldn't forget that it was a major achievement that the big crises that we've gone through over the past years have not led to financial instability in the euro area. I mean, that is of course the result of regulation and of supervision. I would be very cautious.
And some good homeworks by the banks, right?
Sure. I wouldn't disagree. But I would be very cautious in rolling any of that back, because I think we are precisely on the right track. On the level playing field there, I would hope for the US to make further steps rather than us rolling back.
We're almost running out of time. I have a last question for all of you, but I need to throw this question at you before I throw the last one at everyone. what will happen, because you both now were mentioning the financial crisis and how the central banks worldwide or globally acted in concert. What will happen when they stop acting in sync? What would that mean for the European single market when central banks don't align their policy and don't act in sync anymore, like we saw after the financial crisis?
What do you mean, in monetary policy or?
In interest rate policy. Interest rate policy, for example.
So there has been a lot of discussion about a potential divergence of monetary policy between the euro area and the US. So far this hasn't really played out that much, because and it's actually quite interesting that the macroeconomy is not all that similar, but on the inflation side it actually doesn't look all that different. And this is why, even though there may be a slight divergence which is temporary, overall I'm not so sure that it is actually going to happen. I mean, if it happens, I mean, of course it has an impact also then on the exchange rate and other things, but these are mechanisms then that then deal with the divergence, and all that of course then feeds again into our own analysis. And so I'm not so concerned.
Okay, I'm asking, I didn't want this to turn into a dialogue, but for so many people in this room, the level of the interest rates, and for so many businesses that you're affiliated with, is just important, right?
Yeah, but I think we are all used to have, I mean, to be honest, I mean, there is never a completely sync monetary policy of the US, don't forget Japan, UK, ECB. At the end of the day, this is then the market, and this is, by the way, while market participants like capital markets banks are there, actually in order to help the clients to navigate through that. So, to be honest, that doesn't worry me at all. That's a result of where the economies are, and we can provide all kinds of solutions for that.
Okay, so we'll see where this takes all of us. Last question is about trust. Trust is an issue that has been raised in the panel before, and I was wondering what trust is necessary, or what is necessary to establish more trust in the European single market?
I think for me it's very much about the level playing field, and again I get back to the politicians giving the right possibilities for companies to perform in the single market, and again for me that is about affordable and available energy, less regulations. There's been 850 regulatory obligations with 5,000 pages in the last 5 years. That's one every second day, and longer permitting time. If you are able to cut back on that, I think the trust will be there, and businesses will start and industry will start to invest again, and we will for sure catch up on the US and Asia. Since our time's already up, I would be grateful for short answers. I'm sorry.
Okay, so same question on trust?
Yeah.
So first of all, we have to explain that the single market has been very beneficial for prosperity in Europe. We also have to explain that there are certain, that actually the success has been basically on the trade in goods. And there are other areas like the trade in services where we haven't achieved a single market at all. So there we have all these regulations and administrative procedures at national level that impede integration. And if people understand that how beneficial it could be to reap these benefits, I think we can also create the trust.
I do believe over the long term, trust will come automatically if people feel that growth is there and we are competitive, and that also their personal prosperity is, so to say, saved and is not deteriorating versus others. So I think we all need to learn again that growth is something positive. If we expect that, trust is coming back.
And I think specifically for our industry, it's patience and continued passion for the topic and not giving up too quickly, because I think trust is lost when things are started, but then we only invest a little bit into sovereignty and not full force. And I think continuous support and driving the key strategic topics forward will create a new industry in Europe, and that will create trust.
Thank you very much to all of you. I enjoyed.